Hello. Now we're going to talk about Unit 3, Chapter 5, Medical Education. We're going to talk about the history of medical education, the difference between undergraduate and graduate medical education, how medical education is financed, because tuition doesn't cover it, the determination of physician competency, and current trends. So I'm on slide number 4. And way back when, think about cowboy times again. Remember when we were talking about the Wild West and all that kind of stuff? Women used to treat people at home. Not really men, but women used to treat people at home. And there weren't physicians, really. There were people who drove around and sold elixirs and things like that, like Coca-Cola, Dr. Pepper, 7-Up. Those were all elixirs. Before they became carbonated beverages that we buy in aluminum cans out of machines. They did have apothecaries back then, which are pharmacists, basically. They dispense drugs in a more formal way than, if you want to call them, physicians. Physicians trained as apprentices back then. There wasn't formal medical education for the longest time in colonial America. I think I mentioned previously that our medical education system, or at least the formal one, is based mostly on the Scottish model. But before that, again, it was apprentices. Someone who was successful as a doctor would travel around and they would take someone on under their wing, and then when the training was done, they'd make the person leave town so they didn't have to compete against them. Now fast forward, and the Philadelphia hospital was the very first hospital in the United States. And way back then, well, hospitals emerged out of almshouses and poorhouses, because when women couldn't take care of the people at home anymore, or people just got sick, they had to send them somewhere, which they congregated. And then based on that congregation, eventually they became hospitals. So back then, hospitals charged apprentices fees to treat the patients. Today we pay the physicians and the residents and things like that, but back then we didn't. Actually, the docs had to pay so that they could treat people. So then move into the 19th century, which is the 1800s. I'm on slide number 5. 4 medical schools were established before 1800. Harvard, Dartmouth, King's College, and College of Philadelphia. Back then, even the faculty didn't rely on teaching salaries alone. Today they do primarily. Back then they didn't, so they had other jobs. So they moonlighted at places. They still treated patients, things like that. Over in the 1800s, remember, we're a capitalistic country, and competition and a desire to get ahead. Many medical schools were developed, but there wasn't any standardization, which was kind of frustrating to physicians, because you didn't know who was a good one and who was a bad one. So in 1847, the American Medical Association, and here's just sort of a fun tidbit. If you find an organization that is an association, basically it's a group of people organized to represent the interests of another group of people. So you have future healthcare executives, that would be technically an association. American Medical Association, the American Nursing Association, things like that. What they then did after 1847 is that they started to evaluate the medical schools. So they then helped form the Association of Medical Colleges, and they standardized a 4-year curriculum. So up until then, maybe some were 2, some were 6, there wasn't any standardization. So the American Association of Medical Colleges, with the support of the American Medical Association, supported a 4-year curriculum, which was then governed by a House of Delegates. And a delegate, just like today in politics, are voted on positions. So they would elect a delegate to represent them in the association, and they'd help basically govern and set up rules for the medical schools. They also started the Journal of the American Medical Association, or JAMA, which is still going strong. It is really the preeminent medical journal in the world these days, scholarly research based on American medicine. Well, so in the mid to late 1800s now, the Flexner Report came out, and it was a report, took a while to complete, but it did a evaluation of all the medical schools in the United States, and was sponsored by the American Medical Association and the Association of Medical Colleges. And what came out of that were entrance requirements. So it standardized what medical students had to do in order to get into the medical school. Also set up standards on how big schools could be and how many faculty they'd have to have based on the number of students. They also helped raise money and really promoted laboratories. Around that time is when medicine really became a hard science. First, remember, there was apprentices and people driving around in carts selling their elixirs, and then we have all these different medical schools. But the medical school model, based on the Flexner Report, promoted hard and fast bench type science. And well, again, that's where Western medicine really had its start. It also helped dictate and establish the good relationship between medical schools and hospitals. So today, pre-medical education is a bachelor's degree. So you can get a bachelor's degree in almost anything and then prepare for medical school. But the big thing is you have to pass the entrance exam and get the right scores and be accepted. Medical education today is a prestigious occupation. Even just medicine is continues to be a prestigious occupation. It has an increase in female students. Up in the first 100 years or so, it was predominantly males, but not anymore. Our recommendations come from faculty in order to who gets to get into medical education, and there's really a promotion of a well-rounded undergrad to help people be more approachable and relatable once they become doctors. So the first 2 years of medical school covers your basic medical sciences, your anatomies, physiologies, things like that. Realize people already have an undergraduate degree, usually in a science of some sort, so a lot of this stuff isn't new. Final 2 years covers medical rotations. So 4 years of medical school, 2 years for the sciences, so think of it almost like a master's degree in science, and then 2 years of rotating through hospitals to get exposure and experience in each of the areas. From primary to tertiary. Primary is, again, your general medical practitioner, your internist, your OBGYN, your pediatrician. Your tertiary care provider would be your super duper subspecialist. So that's the whole gamut. Courses help facilitate a humanistic approach, meaning that bedside manner, it has been recognized and acknowledged as very important in order to have a good outcome. And schools require the United States medical license in order to be considered a doctor once you get out. There's also osteopathic medicine. That's a DO, Doctor of Osteopathy, as opposed to an MD, which is medical doctor. Both of them are full-blown doctors. DOs view overall health of a patient, so they're considered more holistic in nature, often are very involved in things like nutrition and things like that complement Western medicine. They try to include health as part of your home and work environment, and they do a lot to work on pain, range of motion, and promoting the body's ability to heal itself. Now, don't be confused. They're not quacks or anything like that. They still have to abide by all the rules and regulations that govern other medical schools as well. And DOs are licensed in all 50 states. So, how does one pay for school? Well, tuition only covers a tiny portion. Less than 4% of revenue is for the school. The greatest source of revenue is from practice plans. So the greatest source of revenue for medical schools are insurance companies. They are willing to pay to have medical students treat their subscribers, and usually they're done in clinics under the supervision of fully licensed and graduated physicians. Medical education can also be supplemented with grants and hospital support. So a hospital who has a relationship with a medical college may pay the medical college money in order to keep it going, and then in return they get medical students or residents to practice in their facility. Determining the actual cost of medical education is really difficult, so there's many theories on how to do it. Medical education has been used pretty successfully to cover underserved populations. Slide number 12 talks about osteopathic medicine, so you can just take a look at it. It's interesting fun facts. So medical specialties. Way back in the 1800s, there was only one specialty, and that was surgery. And think about it, was World War I. Usually men or boys, have a limb blown off because they had bombs and mines and stuff like that. And in order to save the patients, doctors were called upon to, cut it off with a saw. So that was original surgery. Surgery started to really develop and get more sophisticated into after 1846, because in 1846 anesthesia was developed. So the ability to put someone to sleep so they didn't feel pain during their surgery was just a huge breakthrough. Way back, back in the beginning, there was a resistance towards specialization. People were purists. They felt, doctors need to know a little bit about everything in order to have the biggest effect. But even back in the 1800s, there was a push for specialization. Specialization then got a bigger push from hospitals and clinics. It just became advantageous for hospitals and clinics to have specialists on staff in order to differentiate themselves from the competition. So I'm on slide 14, and there's standards in graduate medical education. In 1900, there were absolutely no standards, but after that, they developed very quickly. Postgraduate school was a repair shop. Really, people were just taken into the hospital to get repaired after a war injury, or maybe an injury on a railroad or something like that. Over time, internships became standard. So remember apprenticeships where they would follow a doc around and learn? Well, what's old is new again. Internships, working in groups, following experienced doctors around hospitals to learn what they have to share was implemented. Specialty groups ended up, they didn't shy away from the specialties and just started to develop standards of their own. And then the medical residency became standard in the 1900s as well. So today's medical education includes a residency. So you have your 4 years of undergrad, your 4 years of medical school, and then a medical residency where you continue to learn about what specialty or general practice area that you would like. It includes a transitional year, meaning you can take time off and you can study. More and more residents are being placed outside the hospitals, and there's a big emphasis on primary care. Modern graduate medical education is that there aren't enough residency slots per specialty based on the demand for those slots. A lot of people would like to have more specialty slots. On slide 17, it talks about the different types of specialties and how long you have to have specialty years of training. I'll let you look at that. If you want a residency, so you're a medical student, you've gone through medical school, and then it's time for you to do your residency after medical school, you do that through the National Resident Matching Program that matches residents with hospitals. And the way that works is that each medical residency program is given a number of votes for each, for students, and each student is given a number of votes. So let's say you get, I don't know how many they get these days, but if a student has 10 votes, they can look at the residency slots and put a number of votes onto each slot that they would want. So let's say there's only one slot they want in the whole country. They can put all 10 votes on that one slot, or they can divide it up, 2 at 5 different ones, or 5 votes for only 2 slots. Now on the other side, the residency program does the same thing. They look at all the applicants, and they have votes per student, and they put their votes on each student who's applying to get in. So where it gets kind of dicey is when, let's say, a medical student puts 7 of their 10 votes on a particular residency program, and then the residency program maybe has a tremendous number of applicants. Maybe they put 1 vote or no votes on that particular resident. It has to be kind of a mutual thing. The residents can get, or the medical students waiting for residencies can get very, very disappointed very, very quickly. In the late 80s and 90s, residencies became a little more regulated in that they dictated how many hours they can work in a row before they are allowed to take a break. That was relatively new. Prior to the 1900s, residencies were really only for inpatient or acute care. Securing, let's say when you're in your residency, that gives you an opportunity to look at specialties, and you can decide whether or not you want to specialize and also start preparing for the specialty board exam. Today, there are more than 130 specialties and subspecialties for medical education, so it's pretty developed. Graduate medical education. So you have your undergrad, which you're all familiar with. You're somehow figuring out how to pay for it. It's no different for medical students. But financing residents' medical education is done in a few different ways. One is that the residents get salaries. So they get paid a little bit. They don't get paid a lot, but they get paid a little bit, and that helps fund the cost of the education while they're doing the residency. Costs were paid by patient caseload. Way back when. Whether it was chicken or money or whatever, patients were expected to pay. Now the government programs primarily sponsor graduate medical education. Medicare is a huge source of funds. There are federally qualified clinics that get paid an additional amount specifically to take care of people with Medicare and also to educate physicians. And then there's a perceived imbalance of physician and patients. The thought is that there are more docs than needed at the moment. So on slide 21, this is a good one to look at for a quiz that tells you what and who licensed medical schools, so you can look at that. And then in ongoing learning in medical education, the professional associations in the schools strongly support long-term lifelong learning. So they want to continue that. Learning can be informal through journals and conversations and things like that. In order to maintain your license, continuing medical education, 4 credits is required as well. And if you're a credentialed specialist, you need exams and recertification on a periodic basis. International medical graduates, of which there's lots, because we have a shortage of primary care docs, so we import residents from other programs. So why do people come from other countries? Well, often it's for political reasons or religious reasons, but very, very often it's for better opportunities because the jobs are better here for doctors. The thing is that international medical graduates have to take the exact same exams as everybody else. So there's very little to fear or be concerned about if your physician is from a different country. So that's chapter 5. Hope that was helpful.